Hey guys, cottage part 3. I want to go over the goal for this collection first. I want to give you the cliff notes on that, and then we'll look at how cottage is useful in that. I didn't really have time to play last night, so I collected, but didn't spend anything and didn't improve anything. There's really not much left to improve at this point, which is kind of the purpose of the video. This is the part in the cottage strategy where you hit this quote-unquote plateau. Where we've made a lot of improvements, but there's really no reason to start planning decorations because our troops are still able to survive on the map. So at this point, we've built up our city, but don't really need to improve it. Don't need to improve it beyond this. I continue to improve it beyond this, but it's not a need. Like, I'm not losing troops. You can see that I've had some injuries. I lost a couple archers, but for the most part, I have the same troops that I've started with. I'm just starting to get injuries now. So the improvements that we're going to make to the city now are not critical. And this is why I call it like a plateau, where early on, we're trying to build up the city, get farm, arches. We want some upgraded housing. For some people, that's villa. I prefer cottages, which is what we're going to talk about. But on this leg, we're improving the city. And then we reach a point where the city is built, but we don't necessarily need troops or attack yet. And we can continue improving the city from there. And then on this downhill leg, we're spending more of our resources on decorations, troops, things like that. And for some people, this plateau is shorter, you know? Maybe you hit this plateau on Tuesday, but you need to start fighting by Wednesday, so you only have 1 day worth of disposable collection, I guess. For some people, that it's just a mountain peak. As soon as you get your city built, you need to start building decorations to attack. But for any city, there's this uphill leg where you should take the time to develop your city before you... I haven't planted a ballistic camp yet. I haven't planted any troops yet. And if you have to manual battle to get your city developed, that's probably the way to do it. Just use the troops that you start with in manual battle so that you can keep them alive as long as possible and spend your resources on developing a city. So I'm going to give you the cliff notes on what we're going to try to accomplish today. I could have actually done, and I would have had to do these steps in two separate settings. So this would have been last night if I actually did anything with my development. I would have generated some troops plus one more farm, and then the morning collection today would have been villas and troops. I didn't do this part last night, obviously, so we're just going to do both at the same time, which actually kind of flows better with the video anyways. So full collection, or full happiness, so we can do collection. But notice that I don't have a whole lot of surplus, right? I only have 50 extra. This is why I've said in previous videos that until you actually need the attack ability, it's a better use of your happiness to continue building up your settlement, right? So let's go ahead and do collection real quick. I think I still have oh, no, those were ready. I thought I had one that was behind. Okay, cool. Yeah, so we got everything. Okay, so part of goal number 1 was to build a farm, and the location that I want to plant it is right here. But you can see that it's going to disconnect the houses in that bottom group. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 would get rid of that road. So I would lose the connection down here on these houses. I'll just make a mental note of that. Part number 2 of this this collection, we'll call this collection number 1, from last night. The second part of that is to start getting troops, and I'm using archers. I don't really use Legionnaire at this level. Occasionally, so I will print one thing of Legionnaire, but mostly just archers and ballistas. So a couple batches of archers, one batch of Legionnaire, and then as many of Legionnaire as we can get. So let's go ahead and sell the tile house. I always do archery camp first. Eventually we're going to have to delete a second tile house to fit either a Legionnaire or a ballista in here. But if you start with the archery camp, you can maintain the action production off of that tile house for another hour, which isn't a big deal. But if you want the actions, it's a good way to do it. I usually don't rush that. I let it cook for the hour, but for the video, we'll just get it built. Let's go ahead and grab like, I don't know, 3 batches. They're pretty cheap. 3 or 4 batches, I guess. One more, just for good measure. That should keep me going until difficulty 10 probably. So let's go ahead and sell that now. At this point, we would need to sell the second tile house, but if you waited the hour for the archery camp, which I would have done, and my timers would have been off. I'll rush all 3 of these. My timers would have been off, but at this point, we would have already planted the farm in that pocket that we were looking at. So all my production timers would be good. The only timer that would be off would be a couple houses here on the bottom. So I'll explain how that would look. I'm going to grab 3 of these since we're doing it. Let's go ahead and sell it. As well as the road there. And there's your ballistic camp. So I'm going to go ahead and rush this. I'm not going to print those troops yet. I'm going to go ahead and rush that though. This is what that would have looked like. I'm going to get a farm plugged in here real quick. Okay, so we have room for a farm. We have a couple tile houses that were disconnected. And after we built the farm, we would have started this troop process over here, where we were waiting an hour for the archery camp, then waiting an hour for the ballista camp, then waiting an hour for the legionnaire camp. So at this point, the 2 tile houses on that bottom have been disconnected for about 3 hours now. But at this point, we can actually cycle those tile houses back up to where the ballista is currently, and just have the ballista disconnected at the bottom there. The reasoning for that is last night, so collection number 1, after the farm and a couple batches of other troop types, I would only have enough resources left over for like 2 or 3 batches of ballista. And at this point, I would like to be able to stockpile enough to get me up to level 10-ish. And we're using the resources from both collections to do this, so I can print all of those in one setting. But if I did this in 2 separate collections, the ballista camp would have stayed at the bottom there. So let's get that set up just so you can visualize it. Okay, this is how it would have looked at the end of collection last night, so collection number 1. We would have printed a couple batches of ballista, but then just left it disconnected. And we'll get the rest of our ballista with collection number 2 today. But the housing over here, which is a cottage, I had to shuffle that in there. But the housing over here, even though it's 3 hours behind, we're not going to get the coin out of it. But we'll have the actions from it at least. And those houses are going to get deleted anyways in collection number 2. So after we collect everything from collection number 2, slide this ballista, delete the 2 tile houses in front of it, slide the ballista up to the road connection, get the troops that we'll need to last until 10, and then delete the ballista camp and plug a farm in this pocket. So I'll have 8 farms after collection number 2, which seems excessive. And I'll come back to that because I've made another video on that, so I don't want to go into it in a whole lot of detail, but I'll circle back to that idea. So for now, let's go ahead and grab the ballistas that we were planning to get. Okay, so we have 90 plus some injured and whatever's in the army setup, so we have about 100 ballistas now. So we're done with that until probably level 10 now. Let's go ahead and get that farm plugged in. On a side note too, I do rush my farms up to this point. I usually don't rush them after this though. So at this point, we really don't need, quote unquote, the supplies, right? Or coin for that matter. We really don't need the resources because we're not really hurting for troops and we don't need to plant decoration yet. The troops that we've been able to print so far will last us until difficulty level 10 when we start deleting some of this hardware to replace it with attack ability. So in the meantime, all the resources that we get are just used for the last few improvements, which is tile house straight to villa. That was one of the questions on cottage part number 1, is why do you delete cottages to upgrade to a villa? And I don't. So the few villa that I end up with every season come from my last few tile houses at this stage in the development. Let's go ahead and get those plugged in. I have the resources for 6. This house is disconnected, and you don't get actions off of disconnected houses, so there's no reason to keep it there. I don't rush these either. Same logic with the farm. We don't really need the resources for the upcoming collection. We've already printed troops. We don't need attack. So there's no reason to rush those. We'll just have a smaller collection tonight from the existing hardware. So we'll miss out on the collection of the last 2 farms and the villas. But we don't really need that at this point, remember? So we'll still get plenty of resources to play around. I just won't get the full potential. So I'll use tonight's collection just to replace the last 2 tile houses to villas. So quick note on the farm thing, and then we'll break down how the cottage strategy helps reach this point faster than just planning villas as soon as possible. The idea with 8 farms is to imbalance collections favoring supplies. So you can see right now that I have an imbalance on the coin side. And it'll actually be pretty even once these villas start producing. It should be pretty even, but hopefully if there is an imbalance, it's favoring supplies. And the reasoning behind that is that once I hit difficulty level 9 or 10, where I need to start planning some attack ability, I can delete a farm only and not have to delete housing as well. So I can just delete a farm, plant an arch and some decorations, and start attacking, but keep all my housing towards action production and still have a balanced stockpile of resources. Even though I'm deleting farms, so I'm reducing the supplies at my collection, I'll still have a balanced stockpile. Does that make sense? All right, so we're done with the strategy part of this. Let's talk about why using cottages, or how using cottages helps get to this point in the city faster. So I currently have 10 expansions, which is where I stop. I have a bunch of ascended stuff planted in my main city, like more than I usually would. So I don't usually reach this point in the development until like Monday night, Tuesday morning. So I'm about a collection or collection and a half ahead of where I usually end up. But still, take it with a grain of salt. But still, using cottages early on is kind of the key ingredient to reaching this growth point as soon as possible. So 10 expansions, 8 farms, which is overkill on the supply side, but that'll allow us to stockpile usually about an extra, so I'll have like 2 million in coin and like 2.8 on supplies. So I'll have a surplus of 800,000 in supplies. So as I start deleting farms to plant arches and decorations, I'll still have enough supplies to balance out with the coin that we continue to produce. Does that make sense? So yeah, 8 farms, 10 expansions. We grabbed, so we'll end up with 8 villa or so when it's all said and done. The rest is cottages. So at this point, we have the troops we need. At this point, there's nothing else to improve or spend resources on. So all the resources we do collect, we'll just stockpile until difficulty 9 or 10 and start deleting stuff to build decorations. But at that point, we have 2 million in resources to build decorations. And happiness is usually barely on point at that stage. So if you start planning decorations earlier on, right? Like I have a 4x4 pocket right here that I could fill with some decorations, but I don't have the happiness to justify that. So wait until the end game when you actually do need that attack boost. Makes sense so far? So let's talk about why cottage uh, is useful towards that. At the beginning of this collection, I had the one villa that I currently have, 9 cottage and 15 tile house. Sorry, 11 cottage cottages, one villa, 15 tile. So effectively, these are villas, remember? And 4 tile houses would be equivalent to a villa as well in terms of actions and coin. The difference is space, but we'll come back to that. Effectively here, I have 1 plus 5 quote-unquote villas, right? And then 4 quote-unquote villas. So I actually have 10 villas in terms of coin and action output. The difference is the villa, quote-unquote, that I had planted up until now cost me 130 in coin and 275 in supplies. 10 actual villas would have been 250 coin, over 1 million in supplies. First of all, pretty hard to get 1 million in supplies if you're burning up all your resources planting villas. You're not going to have a whole lot left over to build a farm. So that's obstacle number 1. The other part of this problem is that unless you're actually rushing these villas, which I'm not inclined to do, that would be 500 shards if we had rushed everything, and I just choose not to do that. If you do want to rush your villas, like I said before, be my guest, plant and rush as many villas as you want, but that's ultimately the main challenge. The part of the challenge here is just the total resource quantity, but the main challenge is that you aren't actually getting the benefit of that villa for 2 collection cycles unless you rush it. So in order to get the supplies we need, we would need a farm, but we're not getting the coin we need to build the farm in the first place, not for 2 collection cycles. So the advantage with using these quote-unquote villas, right, it's actually a pair of cottages, but in terms of coin and action, it's a villa. And the advantage there is that, first of all, I'm getting actions immediately, so I'm able to get more of the easy fights, right? That's advantage number 1, but on the coin side, that cooks immediately. Effectively, it cooks in an hour, but it's ready for the next collection. Tile house obviously is ready for the next collection as well. So throughout this initial development where you're starting to get some momentum, cottage and tile house are allowing me to get that coin immediately for the upcoming collection. And the resources that I'm saving, right? I have the same 10 villas, just with a different combination of housing, was 750,000 supplies cheaper to build. And so those resources were spent on the expansions to add additional tile house and cottage. So in terms of coin and actions, it's the exact same output. But in terms of resources, cottage and tile house has allowed me to repurpose those resources towards expansions, as well as arches and a surplus of farms, things like that. So resources better spent somewhere else, right? Now we've hit this plateau, and that's the topic of today's video. Now we've hit this plateau where we have the troops we need. We've already got the expansions. We have a surplus of farms. There's literally nothing left to use our resources towards. So at this point, now we can plant some villa comfortably, knowing that even though we're not going to get the coin on the upcoming collection, we'll at least be getting the actions out of it in 10 hours, which is really all I need at this point. We don't need the resources, right? I already have 300,000 surplus coin, so I don't really need the coin out of it, but I'll at least be getting the actions on the next cycle. That's the main thing I want out of these villas that we just planted. And the convenience here, the comfort, is that I don't need those to be collectible next round. It's not like, oh, I really need those to cook because I have to plant farm number 3. I've already planted 8 farms. I don't need the coin. I'm just going to stockpile the coin for the end game, but I don't need to generate it on the next collection cycle. I don't mind waiting 2 cycles for that. So that was the other question on my original videos. Why do you wait so late to plant villas? Well, because I'm not inclined to rush them, first of all. So I would be potentially losing out on the coin benefit early on, since I'm not rushing them. So I would be a day behind in planting a farm or whatever. So I wait until the point where I don't need the resources to plant them. And at this point, it's still Monday, so it's Monday morning. We have a few more days for me at least until I need to start planning attackability. And once I do need attack, I'm going to be deleting farms anyways. So the villas that I planted now will stay until Sunday night essentially. And the actions will lose a few actions by not rushing these. But remember, I already have effectively 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 villa, right? Plus I already have 7 villa. So these are just extra, you know. The other advantage here is kind of on the tail end of the season. So we're at this plateau point, right? That's the topic of today's video. We've reached this plateau and we're building up our productions, right? And effectively we had 10 villas planted, but the housing that we used, the housing alternative that we used to get that quantity of coin and actions is coming from cheap stuff. The downside with the cheap stuff is that it takes up more space, right? But the trade-off here is that the cheap stuff also gives us enough surplus resources to buy the space for that cheap stuff. So the advantage here on, as we're working up to this plateau side, is that we've gained 10 expansions in the process. So we've had 10 villas basically since opening day, right? In terms of coin, we've had 10 villas all season, but we're gaining space in the process, right? So on the tail end of the season, as we come down from this, I have 8 farms to delete, and I'll have a surplus of supplies already stockpiled. So as I delete those farms, my supply collection will go down, but my total supplies available will still have plenty left over. So those 8 farms are equivalent to 160 squares, aka 10 expansions. So all 10 of the expansions that I've added to this city can actually be deleted at some point and filled with attack. So the advantage here versus using the villa method, if you actually do plant actual villas early on, the distance of this uphill leg is a lot shorter, right? Because you're using all of your resources on an expensive building. You hit this plateau, come down, you don't really have a whole lot of hardware left over to delete once you do need attack. Does that make sense? So kind of 3 parts to this strategy. First of all, we get more space. We also get that space faster. And up until this plateau point, we filled this space with cheap production. So even though it doesn't produce as much as the upgraded buildings like a villa or a farm, we're using butcher and tile house early on, but we have so much of them on such a large grid that those 4 tile houses accomplish the same thing as a single villa on a smaller grid. The advantage is that we're getting space faster. And then once we hit this plateau point where we have all the space we need, don't need troops, now we can go back through and upgrade all 15 tile houses into something, you know? Instead of 1 villa on a small grid, we now have 6 villa on a large grid. Does that make sense? So kind of the strategy here is kind of just exponential growth, I guess. Just kind of snowball those resources until there's nothing left to do with them except to generate more resources, which is kind of redundant. But the end goal, this is a means to an end, right? The end goal is to delete 3 or 4 farms. If I delete 3 farms off the top there, I still have 5 left over that are producing supplies. 5 farms and 13 villa on a QI settlement is pretty respectable, right? But at this point, I'll also have 3 additional expansions worth of arches and decorations, which makes the fighting on difficulty level 10 actually pretty enjoyable. Like QI fighting is a chore, right? We do it for the rewards, but the fighting itself is kind of a chore. So having the ability to just blast through level 10 with like 2 troop deaths is the end goal that we're after, and the cottage is a means to an end, in my opinion. So that's it for this one. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.